Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of the Spyderco Magnitude, this big guy here. This is an interesting knife in that it's actually a sequel to a knife I reviewed previously, the Spyderco Rubicon, the original Rubicon. And it's a Peter Carey design here. We can see the maker's mark here, and it's a very, very interesting, very different, and kind of unusual sort of knife out there, especially coming from Spyderco. It's very unique. One thing I'm going to say, though, is I'm probably going to use the term amplitude for this knife instead of magnitude at some point in time, because I use the term amplitude about 1 billion times a day, working in signal processing, and I use magnitude roughly never. So, yeah, be on the lookout for that. If I talk about the amplitude, that's what I'm talking about right here. Let's do a quick size comparison for you. First off here, we got a Spyderco Delica, got a Spyderco PM2 here. So, there we go. In terms of size, the blade is actually slightly longer than on the PM2 in terms of usable cutting length. This is the Ontario Rat #1 here. So, again, you're in the same department in terms of blade length and in terms of handle size, although this guy is, well, notably thicker. So there's that. We've got the Spyderco Sleesh Bowie, which is a very interesting comparison for a couple of reasons. So we'll talk about that later. And, well, since I've got it on my table at the moment, this is a Chris Reeve Knives Large Shabazz in the Insingo blade shape. And actually, we can see that the cutting edges are very similar here, so that's kind of a good thing it's got going for it. But anyways, let's go on ahead and, as always, jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, so on the good side, first off, I'm a big fan of the blade shape on this guy, in that it is sort of a modified sheep's foot sort of affair. You've got enough tip going on here, especially with this swedge and with the angle of the grind here, that you can do kind of a penetrating cut if you're trying to cut into a bag of sand or something like that. But you've also got this sort of a very belly-heavy movement. You've also got a nice angle to it, such that it can be used, although a little bit questionably with the thickness, for something like food prep or cutting onto a surface. So that's very nice. Overall, I like this blade shape a lot. And as I said, it's reminiscent of the Insingo blade shape coming out of Chris Reeve Knives, which is a very, very, well, it's a very functional sort of cutting tool blade shape. So I'm a fan of that very much. I also like this swedge on this guy. It's got a bit of a harpoon look to it, which is getting popular these days, but just the way that it's done, the intersection of these two grinds is very nice. I'm a big fan of the angle there. This is, it's nicely done there. I also am a big fan of this choil on this guy, which is not only a finger choil for actually gripping the knife, but it's also a good sharpening choil. You can see here that the plunge grind stops here, and the choil stops here, which means you can sharpen the entire length of this blade without a whole lot of trouble. Then finally, I gotta highlight the steel is S30V steel, which is fine. It's a good-to-go sort of steel. There's no particular problem with S30V, so that's good. Next thing I gotta comment on are the details on this knife. I'm a big fan of knives, especially in the higher end, that get some of your details right, and this has got a bunch of, well, places where it's very clear that Spyderco and the designer were really, really trying. So, for instance, one of those things is this little G10 inlay here. If you take a look at it from the side, and I don't know how visible this is going to be on the camera, but tactilely it's very true that there's not a whole lot of gap between the G10 and the carbon fiber. As you run your finger across, really you feel the pivot, but you don't feel a whole lot else. It's not as polished as on the Rubicon, but that is a nice little kind of thing. They've really made an effort to get that G10 and the carbon fiber linked in together very closely. So I like that. They work as just one piece. Good. Next thing, on the lock bar itself here, you've got this scalloping going on, which is nicely done. It gives you a fair amount of traction as you open this guy up. As you pop it open, that's nice. It works beautifully. Let's be real here. So that's good. I like the carbon fiber on it itself. It's much more reminiscent of the carbon fiber on, say, the ZT452 here, although this is in some ways even more luxurious. It isn't marbled carbon fiber, but it has, I don't know, it's got a great look to it. It's got a great texture. It's a very subtle one, but I like this carbon fiber way more than any of Spyderco's other carbon fiber out there. Most of the time, their carbon fiber tends to feel a little bit lazy, and some of the time, it's just a sticker. So this is well done. I like that. The titanium on the interior of this guy, you can see here, this inner gray layer, is darkened, dyed, processed in some way or another, so that it really matches nicely with the carbon fiber. It's not an exact color match, but it's complementary. It looks very nice, and I think it looks way nicer than had they used a bare titanium in there in the middle there. Graham mid-deck Razel over here, by the way. Next thing, this one really blew me away when I noticed it, but take a look at this. On the flipper tab here, instead of having a 90-degree angle, instead you've got a nice rounding of the other side of the flipper tab. This little surface right along here is nicely rounded off, and that's a real nice sign. You don't very often see that on knives. Here, I'll deploy the Razel. Even this guy doesn't have it, but that's because this is really designed to be a finger choil as well, and so by rounding off that flipper tab, they've created a surface that is much more comfortable for your index finger to rest on. That's something that took an extra step in there, but that they chose to do, and I appreciate that deeply. It makes that a lot more comfortable to use. Other details in here, and I know I'm obsessing here, but on these kinds of higher-end, more artistic knives, this is really where a lot of the joy is. You get some nice rounding on the backspacer here. It's very easy to do a boring G10 backspacer that just kind of sticks up, or that's flush fit, but instead you get this sort of bumpy texture, but it's rounded in such a way that it doesn't really chew on your hand or on your pocket. In some ways, this feels a little bit better than I recall the texture on the Rubicon feeling. On the Rubicon 1, this was a lot sharper. On this guy, it's much more rounded. It's much smoother. So you get a little bit of extra texture from it, particularly as you're doing the flip here, because flipping always kind of pushes it back up against your hand, but it's not going to be eating your hand as you're reaching into your pocket, say, to get at your wallet or something like that. Nice, nice, nice. The jimping up here is another thing that's nicely done. Spyderco's jimping tends to be, well, very functional, very straightforward. It's just a series of carves. But on this guy, they've really done a much better job constructing that jimping. You can see here there's chamfers not only on the sides of the jimping, but even in the middle there. These are actual individual machined cuts rather than coming in there with some sort of a shaped wheel that just with teeth that kind of pulls it out. So this jimping is very effective for the finger, as well as very attractive, and it feels nice in the hand. It gives you a lot of texture, but without that feeling of this is eating my thumb. And that's a good thing. The pivots on this guy are fairly unique. They've been on the Rubicon, but I think that's the only other knife these particular pivots have been on, but they're single piece. If you pull this out and you watch this assembly video, you'll see that there's this silver part, and that's attached to the black part in there, and the whole thing screws out as a single screw. Beautiful, beautiful thing. The millwork on the knife in general is just very nice. This is a Taichung Spyderco, and that shows. And, overall, even the grind looks very, very professionally done. One final thing I'll point out here is the maker's mark, and I hope I can really capture the sharpness of this, but the etch on that maker's mark is really, really nice. I mean, the Spyderco is, the spider is actually, I think, machined in there, but this guy, I don't know if it's etched or it's machined, but whatever it is, it's got a very nice little hint of depth to it, but the edges are beautifully done. That's just so nice. So overall, I am very impressed with the details on this knife and with the niceness of the construction overall. You can tell that Spyderco really, really wanted to do this guy right, and that's nice. Then finally, on the good side, the ergonomics on this are very, very good. There's only one real hot spot for me in my small hands with this, and that's this little clip ramp here, but it's not bad. And if you're holding it in this position, at least for my hands, that's a non-issue. And it works very nicely here, as well as to a lesser extent in this sort of a grip. However, when you choke up, it's very, very good again. And again, that ramp is in a decent position. So ergonomically speaking, you can tell that this is a Spyderco. The fact that it's so wide, and we'll get back to that, rest assured, means that this fills your hand, and it just ergonomically speaking, this is great. So that's what's good about this knife. It's got good ergonomics, even great ergonomics. That could be what's great here, but it isn't. The details on it are everywhere, and it's nice. It is a very nicely made knife from Spyderco. And then finally, I am a fan of many aspects of this blade. So that's what's good. Let's talk about the greatness here. The great part of this knife is, honestly, without a doubt, the action. This has the best action I've ever handled on a Spyderco. In terms of flipping action, it is just great. It fires 100% reliably. The detent is not as snappy and kind of clean break as it is, say, on the 452 here. Spyderco tends to do the detents a little bit differently. However, it is absolutely spectacular. It works a little bit better as sort of a hybrid push-button sort of affair. If you're trying to do a classical light switch, it'll still usually deploy, but it feels a lot slower. This guy just works really, really well, though, as a detent. Absolutely great. And then on the close, this guy is very, very smooth. And part of that's because the blade is big and heavy, but this is a very, very smooth knife. It's running on bearings, and this is just probably one of the best actions that Spyderco has put out, if not the best. The Rubicon was really good as well, but with this heavier blade, it becomes even more compelling. So the action on this guy is absolutely great and is proof that Spyderco, although they had a rough start with their flippers at one point in time, is really capable of doing something impressive. And I like that very, very much. So that's the great here, is the action. Great thing, 100%. Let's talk about what's not so great, go into the bad. So on the bad side, a couple of things, most of them nitpicks, but a couple of real issues here. First off, I'm not a fan of the fact that the fit and finish on this guy is actually a little bit lesser than on the Rubicon that came before it. And I'm not saying this has bad fit and finish. This has great fit and finish, but the Rubicon was really exceptional. It felt like a custom knife. It felt like, somebody at Taichung, where this is made, by the way, the Taichung, Taiwan factory, really loved that knife as they were making it. This guy doesn't have quite that same feeling. For instance, the carbon fiber on this guy, which I do love very much, doesn't feel and isn't as polished. On the Rubicon, it was literally polished. It was more reflective. This is a much more matte feeling, something more akin to what you get on your ZT452, although again, I much prefer this carbon fiber, being contoured and just, frankly, looking a little nicer. So that's one issue with it. You can also see these little issues in other places. The G10 here. If we look at that little G10 ring in there, and I apply a little bit of light from the side, just a little, you may be able to see that actually there are areas where it's more sanded and areas where it's less sanded. It doesn't have that feeling of one cohesive piece with the carbon fiber as strongly as it did on the Rubicon. On the Rubicon, that was blow you away good here, and it could just be quality and consistency with this one, but I'm seeing the same thing on this side as well. Not a huge fan of that. Now, that said, these fit and finish gripes are very, very small because this is a great knife fit and finish-wise, and actually, you're getting more knife for less money here. The Rubicon was $325, this guy's $290, and so you're paying like $40 less here, and you're getting a bigger knife. Something had to give, and I'm not super shocked that it was the fit and finish at that really high end. That said, that was one of the things that made the Rubicon so exceptional to me. And so to see it missing here feels a little bit like they're missing the point. Yeah, so there you go. Next thing, another nitpick on this guy is that, for instance, on your little liner lock here, this jimping is very, very, very sharp. It's got very kind of pointy edges to it at a certain point. I'll show that off here. But those little edges really do dig into your thumb. It's not a huge deal, and it means this is very easy to pop open, much more so than the Rubicon was. But it's not super ideal there. Next in the way of nitpicks, I'm not in love with the clip. Some people hate this clip. The Epic Snuggle Bunny, I believe, just hates this with a freaking passion. However, I'm just not in love. For a couple of reasons. The acid wash is going to show wear poorly. Over time, that's going to scratch, and then it's going to be silver. I really wish that they'd gone with a more polished clip along the lines of, well, what you see on your PM2 here. I think that'd be a little prettier. I do like the fact that it is custom made to kind of fit the knife. I don't, however, like the fact that it's very shallow carry. If you slip this in your pocket, you're going to be having this much of this knife hanging up out the top there. It's very nice for pulling it out of there, but it's, I don't know, I like a little deeper than that. So, not a huge fan of the clip. Next thing that's getting a little bit more meaningful here, this flipper tab is not super well designed for what it's trying to do. This is not a great light switchy flipper. You can do it, but it really feels better as a push-button-y thing. But it's got this very strongly, it's not hooked, but it feels that way, flipper tab on it. And especially with this little top bit of jimping here, it really kind of bites into the finger in an unpleasant way. I don't like the shape of the flipper tab relative to the action that it demands. Still a nitpick, but it does bug me a little bit. More meaningful things, meaningful to people who aren't unique Shabazz. The blade on this guy is really thick. Look at the thickness of this guy relative to, say, the Spyderco PM2. This feels a little bit thicker than the PM2. It's about the same thickness as the Graham Razel. This blade, though, this knife on the whole, isn't necessarily meant for hard use. This is kind of a collector's piece. Let's be real here. You can use this hard, but I don't know why they didn't go with a slightly thinner blade stock on this guy. If you're making something that's more meant for the collection, I wish that they had made the knife a little bit less thick overall, and we'll get there. And made the knife a little bit, the blade a little bit thinner, which would make it a better slicer too. Speaking of which, I'm not in love with the grind on this guy for a couple of reasons. Aesthetically, this knife is very rounded, but this grind has this straight line right in the middle there. That seems to clash a little bit in a lot of ways for me. I would have preferred to see a grind that really follows the blade contour. I also would have preferred a deeper grind, so to speak, that goes up a little bit higher, because this knife is a little bit thick behind the edge. It's a hollow grind, so it's not as bad as it looks here. And it's still, not exactly a Medford here, but it is very, very thick behind the edge. And so this isn't God's gift to cutting, and that's a little bit ugly. Not a fan of that. And so the blade is just too thick, and the grind on it could have helped that a little bit, but it doesn't so much. So that's disappointing. And then finally, on the bad side, I'm not a big fan of the price, because, look, $300 is a lot of money for a pocket knife. $325 was the Rubicon, and I called it a gem at that price, but they went a little bit further with it. This guy, for $290, I don't know, I'm probably being a little choosy here, but I wish that they had either priced this guy at $350 and went all out on the fit and finish like they did on the Rubicon, or dropped it down to $250 and, made it a little bit less fit and finish. I don't know, it just feels like it's trapped in this weird area where it's not quite to that level, but it's not, they didn't go, I don't know. At the same time, I'm not a big fan of the Rubicon too, which took away all of that and still has an expensive price. I just don't know. But the price is a lot of money. No matter what you feel about it, no matter whether you would rather pay more for more finishing, it's still a lot of money. And you're in that price, you're $10 more and you got a Sleesh Bowie, which is one of the very best knives ever made as far as I'm concerned. So those are the bad things. I'm not a big fan of the price, although, again, I could see it higher or lower. But where it is, it's a little awkward. I'm not in love with the clip. I'm not in love with the hook choil jimping. The blade is just too damn thick. And I was a little disappointed to see that the fit and finish was lower relative to the Rubicon. Let's talk about the ugly here. Okay, so on the ugly side, there are three issues here. First off, I'm not a fan of this brown. A lot of people have referred to it as turd brown, and that's absolutely apt. This is turdacular. This color is absolutely diarrheal. I don't particularly like it very much. The contrast with the orange and the carbon fiber is what made the Rubicon so compelling in a lot of ways. And then to switch to this, which has very little contrast. If you're looking at this from afar, you're not even going to notice that there's a G10 inset. And then when you lean in, you're going to be like, ooh, that's, somebody had a little accident around the pivot there. It's a different sort of affair. So I don't love the brown. I wish they'd done damn near any other color G10 there instead of this brown. But whatever. That's a matter of taste. Maybe some people love it. Moving along. The next issue with this guy is that the blade comes a little bit close to the open edge in the back here. See if I can kind of tilt it so you can see this little chunk right here. This little chunk right here comes awfully close, to the extent where if you got this in your pocket, it could actually cut into your wallet a little bit, or if you've got small fingers, it could cut into your fingers. Because this gap is fairly wide, that's a little close and that's a little ugly. I'm not a big fan of that. And it probably, if I were keeping this in the long term, I might even extend this finger choil a little bit just to remove that issue, remove the possibility there. Then finally, the ugliest thing about this knife, and the thing that's kicking this out of my collection in the grand scheme, is that it is just very, very, very thick. I mean, seriously, this knife is absolutely thick. Let's see here. We'll measure it without the clip at its thick point here. We're looking at a very, very thick measurement. Now, well, let's just do some comparisons. This right here is your Ontario rat number 2. I'm sorry, rat number 1, and this is already an overly thick knife. This right here is your Spyderco Sleesh Bowie, which is getting lost inside the thickness of this knife here. Next to your Spyderco Delica, this is damn near comical. This is very, very thin. The Graham Razel is looking pretty petite next to this guy, and even the only knife, in fact, that I have, well, actually, there are 2 knives. The Z Hunter at the skull is slightly thicker than this guy, and your Medford Marauder is right about the same thickness as your Spyderco Rubicon. That's pretty out of control. So the thickness of this knife is astounding. It's huge. And that just means that in the pocket, you're going to feel this guy. It's nice in some ways for the ergonomics, but you just feel this all the time, and it's a stretch on the pocket. It's a different feeling carrying something that's this thick in your pocket than there is anything else. It's not so heavy, so it's not quite so oppressive as something like the Marauder here. But nonetheless, I mean, for a 5.2 ounce knife, which isn't that bad, this just carries huge. You never forget that this is with you. And that's no good. So that's what's ugly about this knife. This knife is just really stupidly thick. The blade is very close to the edge right here, and the brown color is turdacular. Not a big fan of that. Let's talk final conclusions here. Look, conclusions-wise, this is a little bit weird and a little disappointing to me, because the Rubicon was a shining gem. I loved that knife, and the reason I loved it is, like I said, it had this incredible fit and finish, this incredible polish to it. Not just like physical polish, but polish in the execution. It felt like a custom knife that was produced by Spyderco. In that way, it reminded me a lot of the Spyderco Nirvana, which was trying to do a similar affair. And so the Rubicon was truly excellent, and it was kind of an ode to the knife-making art. Unfortunately, with the Magnitude here, by lowering the price a little bit and doing a lot more, they had to sacrifice what made the Rubicon so special in my mind. You end up with a knife that is still very well made, still has great fit and finish, but it's just not to that same standard of holy crap that the Rubicon was. And so without that, you're left with a very weird knife in a lot of ways. I mean, it's got a great action, really top of the line. It's got a great construction, and it's got a very unique and funky design. However, at the same time, it's huge, huge in the pocket. It's a little bit impractically shaped for everyday use, given the blade and the grind and whatnot. And it's vaguely third-colored in places, and that's just not ideal. And so I'm kind of in this weird situation where this is not a bad knife by any stretch of the imagination. If you are in love with this design, if you're in love with the look of this knife, and it is very uniquely designed, has a very interesting look, and you're willing to spend the money and put up with the fact that this is thicker than a frozen milkshake, you're going to enjoy this. It's a very nice knife. It's not a bad knife by any stretch of the imagination. However, where the Rubicon made my heart sing, this guy arouses no passion whatsoever. It's missing that, I'll just say it, that snob appeal for the high-end custom knife sort of feeling that the Rubicon had. And so if you're just looking for a good pocket knife and you want to spend $290, this is an option. But it's a weird option. Honestly, I would tell you to kick $10 more into the pot and go to the Sleesh Bowie, which is one of the very best pocket knives ever made, and has that same feeling of, oh my God, this is pretty much perfect. Just doing a very, very different thing. You know, I understand that the target market for these 2 knives is very different, but nonetheless, that is something you got to keep in mind here. For $10 more, you're there. So I just don't know where I land on this guy. It's fine. There's a lot of good here, but it just doesn't. It's not a gem by any stretch. It doesn't make me joyful. It doesn't make my heart sing. And honestly, when I realized, okay, I've carried this enough now that I understand it, I was relieved, because this is just not that much fun to carry. So I guess there we go. That's the conclusion. If you're absolutely in love with it, you're willing to put up with its flaws, there's just a whole bunch of good here. But if you're not, there's a whole bunch of good available, just a little bit more. And even looking at the Rubicon 1, which was a great knife. So there you go. I guess that's the conclusion. Hope this has been interesting, that the magnitude of this review was appropriate. It wasn't even funny. But most of all, that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.